Hello, everyone. Welcome to New Frontiers in Black Placemaking. My name is Jessica Sewell, and I'm co-director of the Center for Cultural Landscapes here at UVA. And I am here to begin with a land acknowledgement, but also something a bit more. We've had some conversations over the last few days and really begun a rich conversation about land acknowledgement, about reparations, about all the different things that are mixed up in this. So this is a work in progress. It's a performance, but it's a performance that has meaning. That's really important. So here at the University of Virginia, we're on the past, present, and future traditional territory of the Monacan Nation. The University of Virginia is also an institution that was built and maintained by enslaved Black laborers. We honor the ancestors, the elders, and the knowledge of both of these communities. However, we also know that simply acknowledging the dispossession of land and labor is not enough. UVA is just beginning with a dialogue with the Monacan Nation and with the descendants of enslaved communities. They're beginning to act. The memorial to enslaved laborers is amazing, but it's just one small step. They've just started graduate and undergraduate minors in Indigenous studies, but not more yet. This work of addressing UVA's relationship with Indigenous nations and with the descendants of enslaved communities has only just begun, and there's a long way to go to attain restorative justice. At the Center for Cultural Landscapes, we commit to remaining in conversation with and creating programming that reflects all members of our community, particularly those who have been historically dispossessed. We welcome conversation about what our programming can be, and will continue to strive to create a sense of belonging for all.
Thank you so much, Jessica. That was a lot of work and a lot of conversation over the last few days. So we had a wonderful lunch earlier today as part of what we're inviting you to today, which is the New Frontiers in Black Placemaking, the Sara, Shallenberger, Brown Cultural Landscapes and Sites Symposium. I am Dr. Andrea Roberts, Faculty Director of the Center for Cultural Landscapes at the School of Architecture at UVA, and thank you for coming. The Center for Cultural Landscapes is made up of an interdisciplinary group of academics and designers who are committed to a critical perspective on place, one that gleans key lessons from the past and present in order to imagine how to regenerate places for the future. And what you see are examples of some of the great scholars who have been part of programming over the last several years as part of the center. And the focus of some of those past symposia have included subjects such as race and public space, history and humanistic inquiry, spatial justice and truth-telling, finding greatness in the ordinary, and people-centered engagement with places. And so I'm very honored to pick up the mantle of Dr. Beth Meyer, Professor Beth Meyer, who founded the Center for Cultural Landscapes, and to continue her tradition, or to at least carry her tradition forward. And so with that, I'd like to ask everyone to acknowledge the great Beth Meyer. And this is the beginning of many thank yous. This, of course, is not an event that happened in a vacuum. We want to first acknowledge the generous funding of the Sara, Shallenberger, Brown Cultural Landscapes and Sites Initiative Endowment, which supports innovative interdisciplinary research and teaching at the University of Virginia related to the study, design, and preservation of cultural landscapes and sites. Endowment-funded work strives to catalyze new intellectual and creative communities across UVA grounds and UVA generations, linking students, faculty, and expert professionals to disseminate the work of UVA community to the broader public, and to propel UVA as a global leader in cultural landscape theory, scholarship, and practice. The scope and reach of Sally Brown's concerns and passions map squarely onto the aspirations of the University of Virginia School of Architecture's cultural work, cultural landscape work. Sara Shallenberger Brown was an environmentalist and preservationist who supported work at a range of scales, from small historic sites to larger landscapes and sites initiatives that range from research, interpretation, preservation, planning, and design of sites that are full of both history and nature, memories and living systems, contested narratives, and disturbed ecosystems. Her granddaughter, Carrie Brown Epstein, a Charlottesville artist, philanthropist, and sustainable farmer, endowed the Sara Shallenberger Brown Cultural Landscapes and Sites Initiative to honor her grandmother's legacy. And we hope to honor that legacy with the work we're doing tonight. We are also supported by descendants of enslaved communities at UVA. Their mission is to research and reclaim the narrative, to honor the legacies of enslaved and free Black communities and their descendants, and to achieve restorative justice for communities rooted at the University of Virginia and surrounding regions. And we have generous support as well from the Division for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at UVA, which is deeply committed to enhancing the well-being, safety, and success of all UVA faculty. Its mission is to coordinate and make collective impact through its Office for Equal Opportunity and Civil Rights, the Office for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and the Center for Community Partnerships. And last but not least, I must acknowledge the dedicated faculty and staff at the University of Virginia School of Architecture, Communications, exhibits, faculty members, who have all helped to make this very event possible, whether it was communications about exhibits or making sure our illustrious guests made it here safely. Everyone has gone above and beyond the call of duty, and I want to acknowledge all of that support. Also briefly make a few fall programming announcements for the Center for Cultural Landscapes. On October 13th, we will have the J.B. Jackson Book Prize. Laura Martin, the winner of the prize, will read from Wild by Design. At a date soon to be announced, we have Mellon Fellows, wonderful scholars, and we'll have a roundtable in which they are going to share works in progress. And November 3rd, as part of the planning department at the school, actually, we have research events, which are just times where people are sharing their work. And the Center for Cultural Landscapes will take advantage of that time to have a bit of an open house and hear from all of you about your vision and your ideas about the future of the center and what we're up to. And we are anxious to hear from you. So please feel free. The last thing I like to do is give out my email address, but this is what it's for. I'm very, very committed and interested in hearing from all of you. Why new frontiers in Black placemaking? Frontiers are political and physical landscapes. This year marks the 220th anniversary of the Louisiana Purchase, which created America's second frontier, doubling the size of the U.S. at that time. The Old West, or the Trans-Appalachian West, lying between the Appalachian Mountains and the Mississippi River, was the first frontier. The boundaries of the frontier have shifted and moved over time and have been a space of banishment, commerce, and conquest. Pacific Coast and Interior Frontier of Manifest Destiny and Conquest, a third frontier. The construction of the idea of the frontier, its structure, its political divisions, and the management of its landscapes have always been considered to be the purview of government, predominantly white-led government bodies, contemplating where slavery is permissible and where Native peoples can be banished. While the Western frontier prompts recognition of the genocide and forced removal policies that continued the American government's destruction of Indigenous and Native communities, our panelists are instead concerned with focusing on frontiers as layered historical landscapes and intellectual spaces of non-exclusionary possibility. In other words, the frontier goalpost keeps getting moved, but what is the frontier now for us? What have we decided? So collectively, as a panel of folks who study and preserve Black places and placemaking heritage, we have deeply engaged for months now, myself and my guest, with frontiers as being about the intellectual limitlessness that we want to integrate into our work within descendant communities of sites of enslavement and intentionally created free communities. So we asked ourselves, in centering our own work on Black placemaking, How do we engage frontierism as being about expansive new ways of increasing the opportunities for Black folks to speak and plan in boundaryless ways? In other words, an emergent strategy for understanding Black landscapes, planning, preservation, placemaking throughout the diaspora. So amongst all of us that you'll hear from tonight, there's 50 plus years of work focused on Black placemaking and agency, and that's what we are building on and wanting to share with you this evening. From Texas, Kansas, New Mexico, and California, we've come together over Zoom over the past few months to deeply engage the prospect of thinking about propagating a just, culturally grounded, but limitless and boundarylessness in places historically significant to African Americans. We all decided we wanted to create discursive space, intellectual space, chatting space for these questions rather than foreground one narrative or one single theory. And during this event, our panelists will share their experiences preserving and planning in these emancipatory landscapes or Western Afrotopias, and then we'll invite you to engage these questions with us as well. So as someone who's been doing work in historic African-American settlements for some 10 plus years, it is exciting and it's a great honor to be joined by the West Coast, or the Western contingent of the people who are doing the work, much like the work that so many people have been doing on this campus and doing in the Charlottesville area community for so long. So I want to briefly just introduce you to our guests, and then we'll begin. Our first presenter will be Dr. Timothy Nelson, a historian. Dr. Nelson is a historian who addresses foundational issues in African American and African diasporic history related to borderlands and the Western U.S. His ongoing research on what he has coined Afro-frontierism in American history is centered on the historically significant Black town of Blackdom, New Mexico. And Dr. Nelson's recent book, Blackdom, New Mexico, The Significance of the Afro-Frontier, 1900 to 1930, provides the most in-depth research on Blackdom, New Mexico to date. He holds a bachelor's degree from New Mexico State University, a master's degree in Black history from the University of Northern Iowa, and a PhD from the University of Texas at El Paso. He served as an officer in the U.S. Army and is a proud charter member of Phi Beta Sigma. Our next speaker will be LaBarbara James Wigfall. She's an associate professor at Kansas State University. She has 10 years of private practice in Texas and faculty appointments and fellowships at Howard, University of Texas, University of California at Berkeley, University of Arkansas at Fayetteville. She's the first African-American female faculty member to receive tenure and promotion at Kansas State in 1997. Her research on African-American communities acknowledges the dynamic role and service cultural landscapes have performed in our nation's history. She expanded the scholarly work in Africa, identifying environmental patterns that may explain African-American antecedents. Dr. Ashley Adams is a descendant of early settlers of the historic Black town and federally designated site, Nicodemus, Kansas. She has primarily dedicated her research platform to improving Black history preservation practices within national and state preservation systems, such as her long-term preservation planning work within Allensworth, California State Historic Park. Dr. Adams also serves as board secretary for Nicodemus Historical Society, and she is a founding co-chair of the Black Reparations Project at Mills College at Northeastern University. Ms. Denise Kadara, president of Allensworth Progressive Association. Since 2011, Denise has served as the president of this nonprofit serving community needs and governance of the historically Black rural township of Allensworth, California. Kadara and her team have developed plans to revitalize Allensworth as a site for ecotourism, regenerative agriculture, and historic preservation. Kadara also serves on the California Governor's Office of Planning and Research, Integrated Climate Adaptation and Resiliency Program, Technical Advisory Council, that's a long one. She is a member of the Central Valley Regional Water Quality Control Board, and she serves on the Tulare Basin Watershed Partnership Board. Her career spans over 25 years of public service and city planning for California cities like Los Angeles, San Bernardino, and San Mateo counties. Her expertise includes housing, economic and community planning, policy and program development, and implementation. I will end now with the questions that each of them are going to attend to this evening in each of their presentations. Dr. Timothy Nelson will speak to the question, what are some examples of the racialized constructions of frontiers absent from our current historical narrative of Western settlement in the U.S. and the Americas? Professor Wigfall will speak to the question, how do we best document and preserve the disappearing Black towns and landscapes of the West? Dr. Ashley Adams, what does just preservation planning look like in the Black West? And Denise Kadar, what can Western Black towns teach educators and practitioners about the impacts of climate change and migration on governance, infrastructure, and land conservation? And with that, I welcome all of our guests. And Dr. Nelson?
I haven't gotten a twist recently, so no. I'm going to take it off. So this picture right here, this 40 acres is the Blackdom town square, but you will see on the next one that it's a lot bigger than that, and you can see the Roswell Correctional Center there. I'm going to get right into it because I only have 10 minutes and I want to read this book. Now, I just published a book, Blackdom, New Mexico, Significance of the Afro Frontier, and I'm going to read from it. Starting with intellectual technology, thought process, terminology, and transliterations. At the turn of the 20th century, African descendant peoples refused to participate in the perpetual smoldering of their dehumanization and made choices to segregate themselves behind the corporate veil of municipality. Few outlets exist to explore the conscious efforts of African descendants who sought autonomy through notions of God and regenerative agricultural practices in frontier spaces. If not distracted by the minstrel-like blackness, in popular media, consciously one might find significance in Black sovereignty that extended beyond notions of a fragile freedom. Undergirding the historical significance of Black bodies in the borderlands, Blackdomites struck oil in the 1920s, finding Blackdom oil was significant because Blackdom ascended to Afrotopia. Borderland studies helps to inform this new Black history. And here in the Crisis magazine, they were here in 1914, as early as 1914, but we'll get to that. So remember that 40 acres I showed you? That's the 40 acres. This other yellow line is actually Blackdom, okay? So it goes from 40 acres to about a 30 square mile square. Introduction, and I'm gonna skip on to Afro-frontierism, and I'm trying to give you an idea of what Afro-frontierism is. I coined the term, so we can talk about that a little bit later. Reconstructing Blackdom's newly discovered history required a wider view and a new lens to fully see significance in the mundanity of documents. Development of the Afro-frontier notion was a way to define this intersection of Black people in the borderlands. Dr. Kenneth Hamilton, best known for his work, Black Towns and Profit, might argue that one was making things up. Dr. Hamilton made a similar remark in reference to the new ways of doing history, using theory and frameworks to reimagine. Between sessions at the 2019 Western History Association Conference, I asked Dr. Hamilton how he saw the profit motive in the development of Black towns when others couldn't. He said it was in the documents. Blackdom Oil Company was in the documents. Intentionally or unintentionally, popular historical frameworks, theories, and narratives purport that Black people in general, and the town of Blackdom specifically, had little capacity or ability to construct an oil-producing town during the Roaring '20s and the Harlem Renaissance. To augment the lack of imagination about Black folks in general and Black towns specifically, this study adopts the Black colonization continuum framework to highlight the long-held impulse of African descendants to migrate and colonize as part of their hustle, going all the way back to Nubia. Preconditions, Chapter 2. New Mexico borderlands and the birth of Blackdom. At the turn of the 20th century, Black folks' excogitation of a Black domain in frontier space evolved from an adequate set of circumstances to produce Afrotopia in Chavez County. Blackdomites believed that God, citizen conditions, collective knowledge, land, and labor were enough to start their autonomy project. New Mexico was a U.S. territory and local jurisdictions were restricted from full enforcement of Jim Crow laws. Also, while the Black population was minuscule, their occupation of indigenous lands was useful to colonization efforts in the borderlands. Black folks understood the American Blackness condition in the territory was enhanced by self-segregation. The Blackdom Townsite Company was part of the scheme to harness Black power at the intersection of Black ministers, Black military personnel, and Black Freemasons. Moreover, incorporation helped erect a corporate veil separating Blackdomites from the unique conditions of American Blackness in New Mexico to participate unencumbered in generational wealth creation during boom times. I just wanted to fast forward to this part because this is my favorite. Okay, so Chapter 4, Afrotopia. Blackdom, Du Bois, and descent into Afrotopia. Now notice I said it ascended into Afrotopia. We can talk about that a little bit later. The Afrotopia referred to in this chapter, the first of 3 parts, begins in a state of surrealism influenced by the omnipresence of W.E.B. Du Bois's 1903, The Souls of Black Folk, and a July 1920 letter written to him from Ruth Loomis Skeen, a white woman. She happened to live 20 miles south of Blackdom at the start of Blackdom's transition during the Harlem Renaissance. At the time, Du Bois was editor of the Crisis magazine aimed at the betterment of Black folks, as well as an outlet for the NAACP. Blackdom, an Afrotopic paradigm, was officially platted as a town in May 1920 and further matured as an investment that included oil royalties. Blackdom was a real place with a tangible means of expression that expounded on personally held notions of Afrotopia. Ontologically, Blackdomites exceeded the goals of Black liberation theology as well as Ethiopianism. And I'm going to pause right here. Is anyone here familiar with Lord Dunmore? Virginia? Yes, Lord Dunmore. No. Okay, so he also had something called the Ethiopian Regimen. We'll talk about that later. Ethiopianism between 1903 and 1920. On the precipice of boom times during an age often referred to as the Roaring 20, Ruth Loomis Skeen letter to Du Bois therefore functions as a testimonial of Blackdomites' successful articulation of Afrotopia, a tangible means of Black expression during a period of Black Renaissance. Employing Du Bois's work in a surrealistic conversation with Skeen's observation, this chapter details Blackdom's first decade while maintaining Blackdom's full trajectory expressed in Skeen's letter. Blackdomites could not predict the weather or the events of the next day. It was inconceivable that they could foresee what would happen over the course of the first 2 decades. In part due to the miseducation of Black folks, we must enter Blackdom's Afrotopia behind the Du Boisian veil of Blackness, knowing that Blackdomites held the belief that a good man's steps were ordered by God. In short, according to their belief system, provided one was willing to apply Christian as well as Masonic ideals and concepts to the collective experience of Blackdom, God would bless them for their faithful endurance. Without knowing the future, Blackdomites assumed success was inevitable. After the trials and tragedy of desert homesteading, guaranteed by God's promise, in the borderlands, Blackdomites had faith in divine sovereignty that was sure to come. Now, one more minute? Okay, so now I'm going to read the letter from Ruth Lubin Skeen. I probably won't get through all of it because it's more than 1 minute, but we'll go for it. Okay, she wrote to Du Bois, I have greatly enjoyed the sample copy of The Crisis, and if you will send me 2 or 3 copies of the Browning book, I'm going to skip on to what she says about Blackdom. Near here is a settlement of Negroes, a little town called Blackdom, consisting of farmers who have wrenched every bit of good out of our bitter soil. They are quiet, good citizens and molest nobody. They have had little chance for the cultural things of life, and I believe they would welcome an opportunity to take your good paper and magazine. Now, she's describing Blackdom. I'm going to go ahead and leave. She's describing Blackdom, okay, from 20 miles south. And she does this in July. In May, they officially platted. Well, they struck oil and were advertising this as early as January of 1920, but she's writing to Du Bois and she just neglects to mention it. That's because she didn't know. So if you have Black folks striking oil and she doesn't know, now we're talking about a brand new history, and that's how I discovered a whole decade of history that wasn't in the history books at all, where Black folks struck oil in New Mexico. So.
I've met people who talk about Nicodemus. Oh, I've heard about Nicodemus. I mean, just get this groundswell. It's a metropolis. It's an awakening when you first get there and you say, with all due respect, this is Nicodemus. If you don't know the history, you almost want to say, it's not that much to lose.
Freedom came, but a lot of people were not free to experience freedom.
The Night Riders or the Ku Klux Klan, quite often the Klan is simply the Confederate Army back alive again. Blacks build a school, whites burn it down. Blacks build a church, whites burn it down. They're just going to risk it and go to a place like Kansas.
So a lot of Black families, majority of them from Kentucky, came out to the West and decided they wanted to settle here.
The best land was already taken, but that didn't matter because it was there.
There really isn't any wood out here for you to build anything. What faith?
During the late 1800s, this was the place.
And then more people were coming in.
cowboys,
farmers.
So many teachers. And they had stores and delivery stables and churches and schools.
They brought the skills they were doing when they were in slavery.
I could cook, so I'm going to open a restaurant. It was their opportunity to do it for the first time. My mother said, we're making a record, and that was just unheard of.
They have a big dance.
The bands would always set up here, and the kids would be out there on the floor dancing.
To experience freedom here must have been a phenomenal thing. The railroad was an entity that really would make or break a town. You know, you could get goods in and out very easily.
There was a belief that they were going to be landowners and they were going to have a railroad. And the railroad didn't come to Nicodemus. Get to Nicodemus, the railroad goes like that. And goes, so the railroad bypassed.
People begin to lose the hope of the town really growing.
The value of Nicodemus is to recognize what we've accomplished. Just unbelievable what they went through. That's why it's so important to try to preserve.
The park service is amazing. We would not be existing without them. But my great-grandparents, they didn't have a national park service to come and help them. It represents for the nation what African Americans did with their freedom. They actually established their own black towns. We didn't really know as a people what to do, where to go, and how to do it.
Americans tell the story of people coming to Ellis Island, but this is also part of that greater story. This is really America. Nicodemus.
You can come to this town and see and talk to descendants, and there are people walking the streets, people living in this town. It continues to be a living history.
I think it makes you want to appreciate what we have even more now. I think just take so much for granted.
It's an American story. It's a story about people's survival.
We're a testimony to surviving against all the odds.
Now you're ready to help customize $652 it would be each.
Good evening. It's a delight to be here with you all, and it's great to see all your faces. And so you just got a real quick snippet of Nicodemus. I'm going to give you some context, because context in American history is just as important as the truth. So for me, the work that I started to do, I did almost 50 years ago. Yes, I'm that old. I am part of the living history. But this work did not come from design or planning. It came out of humanities. And there are a lot of us in the design field who don't think very much about the historic side of things. So I want to share with you some revelation, some lessons that I've learned in doing this work over a period of time. First of all, there are both myths, There's the issue of oral history. There's the issue of whether towns stood alone. What resources are there that challenge the establishment of evidence? And what have I learned? So let's start by looking at the 1890s map of Negro population. And one of the myths is that people ex-slaves moved from the South to the North, to the urban environments. And you can see, though it's a bit of a shaded, transparent image, that there's lots of beige to the West. And those were Black people who moved into that great frontier that we heard our former speaker speak about. And the point is that vernacular architecture and ethnographic landscapes are revealed in reality in American history as layered, intermeshed, fused, and even confused. There's this, like the soil of this earth, that layering that somehow or another became the topsoil told by white historians. And so I bring this up because the historical record has focused on these primarily white colonies, but at the same time, there were African American colonies. And these colonies, as we saw them, had 7 different types. We know about Black towns. We hear that term. But there are a lot of others. We also know about slave villages. That's where a lot of historians have focused their attention. But there are a number of other places that happened in between them. So I want to talk about how do we identify and address the number of these settlements, which ultimately contribute to the American landscape as much as other settler cohorts in a period of dwindling human resources. And what resources are challenging to establish evidence? So I bring forth 2 of the posters that we've done, and we start with rural villages after slave villages and freedmen's villages. And I encourage you to go back, and I'm going to give you a little snippet. Look up Arlington National Cemetery. You'll be surprised that there was an African American village there before. So when we talk about the contributions that African Americans have made in this country, we go back further than 1690 in the Bay of Fundy in Canada, but there's very little record of the names of those places. And that's because surveyors didn't want to be there or to tell you in the history that those were Black settlements. And in Canada, we saw Negro settlement, but not in the States. So here, we've mapped for you the turnover of these plantations after the Civil War, and to show you that, and this took quite a bit of research. So how do you do that? You go back into the record and you find all of the land along the Mississippi River, which was converted by owners who gave up their property. And one of the unique things about this image on Rural Village is how there's the coalescing of families or settlement blocks that come together to make communities. And then you see other places where there's total blankness. In other words, those families who had lost their land were not willing to give it over to ex-slaves. So there's this grouping that when you map it, you begin to see where discrimination happens and where people were allowed to gather themselves. Black towns is another type of settlement type. But within that, there are actually 6 different types of Black towns. There are industrial towns, migratory towns, institutional towns, market towns. We could go on about them, But one that fascinated me were resort towns. Actually, African Americans had their own resorts, most of them along the Gulf, but one in particular, what we actually documented, was in the Colorado Rocky Mountain region. And that one was significant because people would travel up the train, party up the hill, and when they got there, they'd come to Winks Panorama Lodge. And that gentleman was one of the first environmentalists. He had a Girl Scout camp at the bottom of the hill, and he would tell these young ladies about the environment and flowers and fauna and flora. He was that guy who had 2 different wives at 2 different times who were great cooks. So can you imagine these little cabins along the way? There was always a honeymoon cabin as well. But to find that in the Rockies with this great view. So when we talk about Black towns, we need to think about all of the different towns that existed in the West. I want to move on specifically to this topic, which I started with about 45 years ago with Nicodemus and the National Park Service. And one of the things that's important is when I talk context, those 2 pictures that you see there tell different stories. One is very limited. You see a mother, a father, and 2 dogs. The bottom story frames that picture a different way. It shows 2 women with a horse, a second horse, probably a buggy, and the assets that people had. And when we think of historians who frame pictures differently, we lose part of the picture. That same thing is also true when you start researching these communities. You can't just look at the community by itself. It is within a context, and that wider context tells you a lot about a place. In the case of Nicodemus, we looked at Hill City and found that instead of there being discrimination between those 4 Black men and white pastor, who was the company who marketed this land, the only difference that we found was a town square for a county seat. There was no discrimination in terms of the size of the lots, the price of the lots, all of that. No historian had found that out because they didn't reach far enough to see the satellite communities that supported Nicodemus. And instead of the law that said it died when the railroad didn't come there, we said it redistributed its population back out to the farmland so that it continued to exist. So when you talk about truth, you got to know the whole story here. Finally, there's on your right a picture in 83 of what the town looked like, and it's not terribly different from what it looks like today. But my point about that is that you can see at the bottom the kinds of things that this community needs. This community is a laboratory which has continued to manifest the celebration of enduring people. And I can tell you, having lived there and worked there, that there's so much of my own soul. And I'll say one last thing. We had someone who was the superintendent, acting superintendent, before the new one, and he had to hire someone. And he did a great job of hiring the new young lady who is the superintendent. But he said to me, I have fallen in love with this place. I love these folks. So if you ever go, let Nicodemus touch you, because it is the community of spirit. And it doesn't matter where in the country you live, it will stay with you for your life. And I can attest to that. So that's my story, and I'm willing to answer any questions about how you document communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Wigfall, and good evening, everyone. I'm very honored to be here with Professor Wigfall, and she's really inspired me in starting my path with research that I do for Nicodemus. Even though we're in two different fields, I'm in public policy, but she has, inspired me since I started with my dissertation research that I finished in 2016. And so it's a great honor to be here with you. Thank you. And so I just want to share a little bit about the research work that I have done in terms of centering what is happening in Nicodemus today and what just preservation looks like in Black frontier spaces. And I have to acknowledge that I am a fourth generation descendant of formerly enslaved people, and my ancestors were early settlers in Nicodemus. I know their stories. I grew up knowing their stories. I know where they're buried. I know where their enslavers are buried in Kentucky. And that's on my mom's side of the family. And on my father's side of the family, I've recently learned within the last few years that I'm a descendant of people who survived the Tulsa Massacre. My great grandfather survived the Tulsa Massacre. And so this work is very important to me personally. And I always like to share that before I talk about, what I do professionally. And what I have done, what started with my dissertation is an evaluation, really, of the preservation policy in Nicodemus. So Nicodemus is a National Historic Site, and it is managed by the National Park Service as well as local partners such as the Nicodemus Historical Society, the Nicodemus Homecoming Celebration Committee. This picture that you see up here at the bottom is from our homecoming celebration. We have it every year. It's our emancipation celebration that's been going on since the beginning of time. And, descendants come back. People come from all over the world. You are all invited. It happens every year, the last weekend of July. Google Nicodemus Homecoming and you'll find our website. But it's just an opportunity for us to come back and, learn the history and connect with each other. And what I have done with the preservation policy research is really just kind of a long-term research analysis of how the preservation policy has played out. What are the outcomes? Is the National Park Service doing what they set out to do according to the legislation? And so it's studying that I have ventured into researching and learning about other places. And I do live in California. I teach at Mills College and Northeastern University, which is in Oakland, California. And when I moved to California in 2008, I moved there in 2008. I didn't learn about Allensworth, California, which the next speaker is going to talk more about, until I moved to California. I'd never heard of it, but I wanted to learn more about it. And so the last few years, I've engaged comparison research, focusing on the preservation outcomes at both Allensworth and Nicodemus, because we've experienced a lot of challenges in Nicodemus. And so I see it, as a part of my destiny and my mission to do whatever I can as a descendant to make sure that my ancestors' stories are told. Nicodemus is a dying town. And so that's really what brings me into this. And these are some of the issues that I have found in my research in general for African American preservation. And this is a general thing, but seeing it at all the Black towns and Black communities, Black frontiers, I've seen it, these issues in all of those places. And so I just want to briefly talk about them. One is racism and poor representation. Racial inequities in preservation have led to underrepresentation and under-resourced historic Black frontiers. And these preservation conditions perpetuate the erasure of Black stories and Black people. And when you think about the erasure already existing within the field, like what Professor Wigfall was talking about, that doubles that problem of representation today. Also, tax dollars and cultural narratives are controlled through discriminatory preservation practices, through policies, codes, regulations, practices, and procedures. Officially designated Black spaces like Nicodemus National Historic Site and Allensworth State Historic Site Park, no matter what government level of preservation it has in terms of legislation, it can embody racism and restrict access and benefits because of those systematic issues. Also, newer updated visitor facilities are needed at these places in order to improve public memory, in order to have a real experience when you come there so that you're so moved by it, you never forget it. And I found in both Allensworth and in Nicodemus, they did not have official, formal visitor facilities. And I can't go too far into that because of the sake of time, but that is something that we do see happening now, 20 plus years after the designation. And so if you just take that and think about other places that you've been and visited and the visitor facilities that they've had, which are state of the art, we don't have that. Also, interpretation, appropriation of African American culture is a problem. This can lead to the exclusion of authentic Black stories and experience in public memory, and it's also tied to the tourism industry and misrepresentation. There's a need for more Black preservation workers. Preservation hiring is vulnerable to competitiveness. And whenever we get into the word competition, we know that, historically, Black people and just, people of color in general have been excluded. And then also there's a need for investment in Black history, local economies, in tourism, and making that connection to the tourism industry and seeing it as an opportunity for public education. And this is, extremely, another issue that is coupled with that is extremely high cost and prolonged deferred maintenance. Deferred maintenance is a major issue across the preservation realm in general. But when we're talking about this for places like Nicodemus and places like Allensworth, it's even worse. And especially when it's based off of visitor numbers and their location and the promotion that is, not going into it because of limited capacity and other reasons. There's also preservation networks include underengaged African American descendants and Black identifying community. There's a need to further engage descendant communities, which, I have to acknowledge that, I really appreciate seeing that happening here at the University of Virginia. You all should be proud of that. The way that you engage the descendants here is really awesome, and that's something that is needed. Also, the social disparities that are connected to this, which a lot of people don't think about it, but social disparities like racism, environmental injustice, segregation, gentrification, economic bias, these are all relevant social issues that are present in African American preservation. And depending on the place and the space, it can look different. And then the last thing is the fact that U.S. landowners are predominantly white. I'm thinking about what that means for the field of historic preservation. Land ownership is important for preserving traditional African American farming practices and knowledge while promoting economic and self-sufficiency for future generations. And so these are all just general African American historic preservation failures that I have seen in Nicodemus, I've seen in Allensworth and other places, but it's not even just specific to Black frontier communities. This is, again, just a national general theme in Black history, period. And this is a quote that really is a call to action that I thought would be very appropriate to share after sharing these preservation failures from Brent Leggs, who is Executive Director of the African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund, who said, "With urgency and intention, the public must discuss these issues, ways in which preservation can strengthen its potential to fight for social justice, and investigate the full consequential impacts these complex issues have on the present. Every preservationist and social impact leader must join forces to develop a preservation-based vision and plan to invest and restore, keyword invest and restore, more assets that hold cultural and financial value, and perhaps most importantly, remain accessible to diverse communities. Preserving this tapestry of our shared legacy is an act of social justice and should be viewed as a civil right." Keyword, civil right. And what is a civil right? It's an enforceable right or privilege which inferred by another gives rise to an action for injury. Discrimination occurs when civil rights are denied or taken away because of due to membership to a particular group or class. And so the question that I pose is, how is fully represented history an act of social justice? And why should it be viewed as a civil right? And that's really a community conversation that we should all be having wherever we are. And this last slide, I just want to talk a little bit about what we're doing in Nicodemus to try to achieve just preservation planning. I do serve on the Nicodemus Historical Society board. I have 1 more minute left, okay? And I just want to quickly state what is reparative justice in this sense. Reparative justice is about seeking to repair in some way a harm that has impacted individuals as a result of human rights violations. And so when we think about the quote that I just shared and seeing this as a civil right, that's what when we say just preservation planning, that's what we're talking about. And these are just some key points that, again, apply for priority action areas that are based off of, scholarly research. And in Nicodemus, we are attempting to address and achieve some of these action areas, like reimagining preservation planning for Black frontiers and, this thing of continuous evaluation. I think I brought this up earlier to our group when we were out there looking at the memorial, or it's called a memorial, right? The memorial of the enslaved people who used to be here, and they had the lines that didn't have names on them; they were blank. And the person who gave us our tour told us that it's always possible to come back to it, to add changes to it, and there's a continuous conversation about it. And this is an approach that we try to take in Nicodemus as well, in working with the Park Service and really implementing this continuous evaluation, this continuous cycle. And that's really, in the field of public policy, that's what we do. It's a continuous cycle. You implement an intervention and you evaluate it, and you make the changes that are needed for the times. And so that's something that's really important. Also, increasing reparative justice funding. We always are looking for more money. But there's a need, I think, specifically for Black frontier community preservation, for specific funding just for that, on all levels of government. And I do see this as a government responsibility. I mean, I'm not saying that it couldn't come from other places, but that's, I want to be very clear about that. Also, investing in descendant genealogy research and, offering opportunities for descendants to be able to learn about their history, and not just the Black descendants either. In Nicodemus, we engage with a few different communities, such as the Indigenous community, and I believe there's a German families that live in the community, and they actually participate in our reenactments because their ancestors helped our ancestors. And so there's a level of healing that comes with that, and understanding and community development, and we see that as a part of that. And then the last thing is promoting inclusive curriculum on Black history, and really getting young people involved. And even if it's, not a part of state or local law, for it to be in the curriculum, to, step out and reach out to those schools and, develop those relationships on our own. And that's something else that we've done in Nicodemus for years. And we actually, bring a lot of the local schools to the park site. And so I've met older teenagers the last time I went, and they were telling me how they remember when they came when they were 4th graders, and it really impacted them. So these teenagers came to homecoming on their own, no parents, and I thought that was pretty powerful. So that's the end of my time.
Okay, it's my turn. Hello, everybody. I'm glad to be here. I'm Denise Kadar, and I want to share with you about Allensworth. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge the land acknowledgement is the Santa Rosa Rancheria Tachioca tribe, has been a part of that area for thousands of years. And I'm wanting to share with you people making a difference. In 1908, Colonel Allensworth, a retired lieutenant colonel from the Army, he and some pioneers were looking for some space in California where they could have land, where they could prosper and determine and have self-determination. So they established Allensworth. It was bought from Pacific Land Company. They sold them 900 acres, and with that 900 acres, water came along. Oh, I didn't change the slide. There we go. Oh, sorry. I always do that. I'm not the techno person, but thank you very much, Ashley. But the Pacific Water Company, Pacific Land Company sold them the land, the 900 acres, and it included water. The community, of course, became a thriving town of over 300 educated people. They came from all across the U.S. They came from Canada even, because they were looking for a place where, as I said a moment ago, to prosper and self-determination. You know, we were still in the times where blacks were just being able to have their own freedom, and they were looking for that place, and they found it there in Allensworth. It was a place where they had everything that was needed. From 1908 to 1914, they had stores, they had a hotel, they had church, they had a barber shop. I mean, it was a thriving community, and they also had a railroad that transported the goods from north to south in California. Once the success was established, here goes the history. The railroad was moved. It contributed to the economy, but that immediately changed. When the pioneers realized that the water wasn't there and that the railroad spur moved, Colonel Allensworth went to try and seek support for that. He went to Monrovia in Southern California, and while he was there trying to get help, he was killed by a motorcyclist. No one ever was charged with his death. But with that happening came the demise of the town. And you also need to remember historically, during the 1919 and throughout that time, black town sites all across this country were being burned down. Black folks killed, hundreds of black folks killed, because they didn't want to see black folks survive and thrive. And when the success comes, expect those things to happen. And it goes so also with our leaders. I'm just throwing that in because it's a fact. By that time, the people started to move away. They were looking for jobs. They were trying to find another way of life, so they started to move away. And so maybe about in the 1960s, the town had not prospered anymore. But the Tulare County officials decided, well, we're just going to bulldoze this town down and do whatever they wanted. But there happened to be a landscape architect that worked at the state park system. He wrote a letter to the director and said, you know, I think Allensworth should be a state historic park. It has historical significance to California. And with that, and he also had lived there, but with that started the drive to make Allensworth, a portion of it, the business district, part of the state historic park system. And that happened in 1974, and it was established. So, you know, all the support that went into that, NAACP and all the people up and down the state helped to make that possible. It was established, but that's all it was. It sat there. By 1979, and when I mentioned Cornelius Ed Pope was responsible for making that happen. He was one of those men that made a difference. By 1979, Nettie Morrison, another African-American woman, came in, and she was also there to make a difference. She bought an acre of land, and I'm her daughter, and I was asking, why are you buying land out here? She said, I want to be a part of history. I didn't know what my mother was talking about, but as it happened, when she got there, the state park, as I said, was barren. It has been designated as a historical place, but nothing went into it. So my mom went to the state park director and said, give me a contract. My mom established all of the events that they currently have in the park. And let me bring her picture up. Thank you very much. She established all the events they currently celebrate in the park today. She did a wonderful job of making things happen. She established the Friends of Allensworth, which is the nonprofit arm of the park. She was an unofficial town mayor. Instead of calling 911 when somebody got sick and died, they called my mom. She did everything. She created, brought services into the community. When she would go to meetings and they were talking about giving out grants, she said, what about Allensworth? She kept bringing Allensworth before the people. It's like, you will not forget Allensworth. Allensworth is a town that refuses to die. And so there was a time when they said that the park had a church, and that's where my mom, the church was there. And it was the only park in the state of California that had regular worship services. Well, you know what happened there? Interpretive history, the church has to go. So my mom went fishing, caught fish, did fish dinners in the park, raised money, bought 2 acres, had the church moved from the park into the community, and it still exists and operates to this day. My mom also fought off all the negative projects that you would think about wanting to have in a community that nobody would want to have. Turkey Ranch slug treatment facility, and the last big one was a 17,000 cattle mega dairy that they wanted to bring into the community. The county had already approved, the county board of supervisors had already approved of it. And my mom said, nope, we're going to take this all the way to Sacramento. And she did. So it was several years of fighting, a lot of petitions all the way around, but they got Jerry Brown, who was the attorney general at the time, to write the legislation, and got Governor Schwarzenegger at that time to sign the legislation that you could not put a mega dairy within a 2.5-mile radius of the state park. Now, I just need to stop right there and let you know, also during that same time, I was at a session in February for Black History Month in the park. We had the state park director there, and he was actually telling the story of how that came about. The white farmers did not want to see Allensworth survive, so they said, we'll put a mega dairy here and run them all out, but it didn't happen. Well, I heard the state park director talk about that, and he said the story, and then I said, wait a minute, you're going to tell this story and not mention Nettie Morrison, who fought this battle to make this happen? That's why she was making a difference. And then when we get to 2007, I have a twin brother named Dennis, and he said, Allensworth, why doesn't somebody do something about this town? It looks the same as it did since 1979. And he is a United Methodist minister. He's also a retired colonel from the Air Force and a chaplain. The Lord said, why don't you do something? And he acquired 60 acres to further the colonel's dream. And that's how I got more involved. My husband and I moved there in 2010, and our goal was to help take care of my mother, who was her health was failing at the time, and to help us do something for the community. And so we did what we did, and we actually started working on a community plan. In 2017, the county did a Hamlet plan. Hamlet plan is a community that lacks the necessary infrastructure and so forth. So we did what we needed to do there. And when we realized that we were actually taking charge of our community, we wanted to do our own plan. So we started on a mission to do our own plan and create our vision. And so that's where we are today. We actually have a program where we have the 60 acres. We got $40 million last year from the California governor's allocation to do money, a project. It's a regenerative agriculture. It's called TAC, Teaching and Innovation Forum. It's actually going to be providing beginning farmer training, and it's going to be starting in a couple of days, actually. We actually have a public curriculum at the school that's where we're working with UC Berkeley lab. Dr. Gaggio's lab is working with us on arsenic remediation in the community. We have a lot of activity that we have going on in Allensworth. We actually have a cultural district plan. USC has worked with us on that. They're helping us finish up our community plan. What I'm trying to share with you is that Allensworth Progressive Association was a governing body founded in 1908. We activated again in 1997. The county has not done anything for our community. It's an unincorporated community. So what we did, without my planning background and my husband, and we just said, we're going to move this engine forward. County didn't give us any money to do our community plan. We did it ourselves. And we're at a point right now to where the county is now coming to us because we're doing something in Southwest Tulare County that does not happen. We're here to make a difference and create the opportunities needed to have our programs succeed, as well as our community. And the last thing I want to share is our historical cemetery. When they adopted the park and established it, why didn't they include the historical cemetery? They chose not to do that. And I'll have to go back to that picture. Thank you so much for asking. I keep messing up. Oh, I did the wrong thing. The other direction? Oh. Okay, anyway. The cemetery, I'll keep talking while she finds it. The cemetery has people that are buried there since 1865. Why would that not be a part of the historical? When people come to the park, the first question they ask is, where's the cemetery? And so, there it is right there. And so right now, we have a lot of effort going into restoring the cemetery as well. And so all I want to share with you is that all the work that's been done is not been for naught. It's to let everybody know, don't let the government run your program. You have a passion, you have a desire to save your community, do what you can. And that's why Allensworth is known as the town that refuses to die. When we had the flooding this past year, they were ready to wipe us out. But we put up our command posts, we called the governor's office, we called the California Office of Emergency Services. We had them descend into Allensworth and help us and protect us. When they said to evacuate, we chose not to, because if we had, I could have seen a resort area with a golf course there. With our planning efforts that we had done, we were not going to let that happen. Allensworth is a town that refuses to die. Stay with us, come out and see us. And for all of those that are continuing to work in preserving your history, take care of it, do it yourselves, because if you don't, you will just see history of somebody else, but you won't have any connection with that. We all are connected, and we should all want to celebrate diversity and the history. Thank you.